Yeah, thanks for coming today. So yeah, as the intro said, I have been working in ecology for around 20 years. I'm based a bit further north in Castlemaine, but have been wandering these forests, as you said, since I was a kid, partly growing up near Dalesford, and we used to wander the forest. Been doing that for a long time. And yeah, really want to acknowledge the contribution of Jeremy for this talk as well. So Jeremy knows more about the plants of the wombat than nearly anyone else I know, and it's been really great working with Jeremy on this. A lot of the photos you see today are Jeremy's, including this beautiful one of Babington Hill. And he's also brought in these really beautiful plants from his indigenous nursery, including some that are quite rare species and not easy to see even in the wild. So it's a real treat that he's brought those in today. I might show you some during the talk, and also after the talk, you're welcome to look at some of these plants. So thanks, Jeremy, for your part of this. So what we're going to do is when I talk about plants, I get a bit excited, and I like to really zoom out and look at the kind of landscape and understand the ecology of these plants and why they grow where they do. So we are going to kind of zoom out for a bit and look at some of the landscape factors like geology, soil, topography, climate. Look at these influences on why we get the plants where we do in the wombat. Then we're going to take a look at some of the vegetation communities, and this is where we get assemblages of plant species which grow in patterns across the landscape, which are very much influenced by those factors, those landscape factors, as well as the processes that occur in the landscape. Then we're going to take a look at a selection of flora species, a lot of photos that Jeremy's provided on just a selection of plants we can look through and tell a few stories, including some threatened species, because there's a lot of endangered plants in the wombat. Then we're going to take a quick look at how fauna use plants in this region before we look at some of the threats to our native flora and what we can all do to care for this forest now and into the future. But first of all, where is the wombat? Because to be honest, it's quite a loose term. And what I've got highlighted there is the proposed national park. But for a lot of people, it's actually probably a broader region that goes. We've got Dalesford kind of on the western side, and even that grey area extending to the north is the Hepburn Regional Park, and many of us consider that part of the wombat as well. The Wombat Forest is down further south, and even it's not like you've got a very neat line between wombat on one side and the Wombat on the other. It's a bit of a blend, but it's essentially this is the core part of where we're talking about today, generally around Dalesford, across to Trentham, Blackwood kind of area. So starting with the geology, the dominant geology of the wombat is very ancient sedimentary rocks. So these were laid down during a time when Victoria was actually beneath the ocean about 450 million years ago. So at this time we had really massive mountain ranges around where the Flinders Ranges are now, and they were depositing all this sediment into this ocean. And this was later uplifted and has formed a lot of the bedrock for this whole region. So it almost is like kind of formed this kind of these layers like a cake, where it's got layers of siltstone and sandstone, and it's also, when it was uplifted, it's been quite folded and tilted. So you can see that's actually was once a kind of flat layer of sediment, has been quite kind of bent over in that photo. We also do have smaller areas of volcanic geology. We've got what we call the kind of newer volcanics, kind of basalt geology, as well as some different kinds of volcanics called the trachyte lava, which I'll talk a bit about. Now, these have a really major influence on the plant. Oh, sorry, before I do that, I'll just show you the map. So the blue is the sedimentary rocks I talked about. So you can see most of this wombat area, mostly sedimentary. The green is the volcanics, or at least the newer volcanic plains. And they were formed around in the last 1 to 2 million years, and had quite a major kind of influence on this region, because we had a lot of volcanic eruptions. A lot of lava was flowing down ancestral valleys where the former courses of like the Campaspe and the Loddon River and things were filled by lava, and of course these were quite large plateaus. But you can see most of the volcanics is actually outside of the reserve system. That tends to support vegetation which is more kind of targeted for agriculture, particularly for grazing. So you can see that mostly we've got the sedimentary left in the kind of park area. The volcanics mostly outside, although we do have little areas around the edges of the reserve system that have the volcanics. And so the soils of the Ordovician, they have been they can be described as infertile, but I would point out that that's kind of like relative term to what humans kind of think is good for agriculture. So yes, these soils are not very good for growing, our crops, but they can support an abundance of native plants. Generally quite, lacking in phosphorus, can be quite hydrophobic, not very kind of good moisture holding capacity. So not the kind of country that's very good for cropping or even for growing grass for stock, but supports an abundance of native plants. But once again, this is a lot of the reason why a lot of this forest has been not completely cleared or selected for agriculture. Whereas the volcanic and the alluvial soils support a very different kind of vegetation. The Ordovician sediments, we tend to get more of our forest kinds of vegetation. On the volcanics, you're more likely to get more of an open kind of grassy woodland. That's to do with having more kind of heavier clay soils. But once again, a bit more fertile in terms of more suitable for agriculture. So the topography of is quite interesting because we're actually sitting, pretty much on the Great Divide. We used to call it the Great Dividing Range. It's actually not a range. It's a series of hills that go across central Victoria, and they essentially divide the streams that go to the north, to the Murray River, or the streams that go to the south, which go into the ocean. So the Wombat is a real key part of this Great Divide, and a lot of being quite heavily dissected country. We have, as I'll show in a minute, we've got streams that go to both sides of the Great Divide in the Wombat. So it's quite hilly. Lots of steep slopes and dissected gullies. Elevation pretty high, about 600 to 880 metres. So I've driven from Castlemaine today, which was maybe 45 kilometres in a straight line from here. That's only about 550 metres elevation. So the higher parts of the Wombat are much higher than, say, further north in central Victoria. Some of the highest points tend to be the volcanic, particularly the trachyte lava domes, because being a bit more more resistant to erosion, you tend to get that sedimentary rock which erodes at a faster rate, and some of the volcanics tend to end up as kind of elevated plateaus or volcanic eruption points. So places like Babington's Hill or Blue Hills are actually these trachyte domes, and they're some of our highest points, sitting around 880 metres. And coming back to plants, this is all relevant because, as I'll talk about, it really has a big influence in terms of that topography. So this is the contours, and you can see, really quite heavily dissected country, particularly that kind of Blackwood area, but all through here, south of we're up here at Trentham. This block down here is quite where you get that really heavy blue colour. That's quite steep topography. But you can see the northern area going up towards Denver. It gets a little bit more flatter. So generally quite heavily dissected with lots of gullies. So as I just said, because it's so heavily kind of uplifted, we get hundreds of different gullies and creeks. And it's really amazing that for it's not a small area, but we have an amazing diversity of rivers that actually originate in the Wombat. We've got the Campaspe, Loddon and Coliban that all run to the north. They're pretty much the Murray-Darling Basin system. And then we've got the headwaters of parts of the headwaters of the Werribee and Moorabool that run to the south. So really, these creeks and waterways have very distinct vegetation, as I'll talk about, but also just so important for, I suppose, the catchments of these major rivers, the forests of the Wombat. And so what I've done here is I've actually changed the yellow kind of colour is the streams that run to the south. They're pretty much going into the ocean, and the blue is heading north. So you can see that's essentially the Great Divide is between the two there. And there's places, like even where we are today, you only have to go a few kilometres kind of south, and you're sitting in an area where if rain falls even a few hundred metres difference, if it goes on the north, it's going to go all the way into the Murray system. It's going to go south, it's going to go into the ocean. So pretty amazing that the Wombat kind of straddles both of those systems. Now, I've talked about this topography because it's it has a major influence on the climate, which then has a major influence on the plants. So when you get this more uplifted kind of higher elevation country, what that does is we've got predominant weather systems coming in from the southwest, and as they meet this higher elevation, it actually raises those cold fronts get raised up into the atmosphere, and they cool and they condense, and you tend to get more rainfall. So this is a rainfall map, and you can't see it very well, but that's pretty much where we are, is in the epicenter of the highest section of rainfall, going up well above 1,000 millimetres rainfall. Once again, I've just come from Castlemaine, 45 kilometres to the south. We're nearly half of that. We're about 550 millimetres. So what you happen is you get this kind of, the southwesterlies coming in, really get kind of captured by the topography, and you get a lot of rainfall. And then as you head north, that's kind of almost like a rain shadow. It dries out as you head north. So if you drive in a straight line from south to north, you'll see a massive change based on this rainfall gradient in the vegetation. It's really quite a distinct change. So yeah, between about 750 to 1,000 millimetres rainfall, which is quite a large range across the Wombat. Snow and frost are not uncommon, which can influence plants. We're having these really cold conditions, and also quite montane. So once you get up above around 800, 900 metres, you tend to get, because those cold fronts are raising up, the water is kind of condensing, and you just get a lot of moisture, this kind of cloud cover across a lot of that Great Divide area. And these montane conditions support much more of a forest vegetation than, say, further north. We also have some pretty extreme conditions. I'm sure you all know about the strong winds that have had a major influence on the forests of this area. That was in 2021. And also, something that Jeremy was pointing out to me is a major, I think, influence on the plants of this region is actually quite hot, dry summers. And so I went through a bit of a tangent here, and I looked at, because Jeremy was pointing out that in summer we tend to get a kind of quite low rainfall. So I had a comparison with King Lake, which has got similar kind of vegetation. Actually sits up quite low. It's only about 550, 600 metres elevation there. But you can see, at Trentham we get a higher rainfall in say, winter, spring. But you can see that summer rainfall is really low in this part of the Wombat. Now that's kind of interesting for me as a plant ecologist, because I think there's a lot of, say, forest vegetation east of Melbourne, a lot of diversity of plants which can thrive over there, but might actually struggle in this part of the Wombat where you might have higher rainfall in some instances, but if you're going to have a really dry summer, that's still going to filter out how many species can kind of survive. So over thousands of years, these kind of rainfall patterns really play a major role in what kind of vegetation you're going to get. So we'll take a look now at some of the major plant communities. And as I said, this is where you tend to, like every patch of bushland is obviously unique in its own way, but ecologists have a way of grouping these together because we get similar associations of plants growing together. So often it's, dominant eucalypts tell us a lot about that story, and then you'll look at what's in the understory, what kind of species they get. And when you get repeated patterns in the landscape, so say it's at a certain elevation, it's on a certain aspect, like it's on a north face where it's going to get more exposed to sunlight, then if you get that condition somewhere else, you might actually have a very similar composition of plants. So in Victoria, we describe these as ecological vegetation classes, so I'm going to use a bit of that terminology today. But yeah, some of the major influences are things like the aspect I talked about, obviously the geology and rainfall, as I've mentioned. And then you've got processes like the wind throw, which can happen over time and kind of have major influences on that structure of the forest. And processes like grazing, animal diggings, and the many ways that humans manage or mismanage forests all have a major influence on plants. So one of our most dominant kind of types of vegetation in the Wombat is our shrubby foothill or herb-rich foothill forests. So I'm sure many of you have seen these. This is a beautiful, often dominated by messmate stringy bark, Eucalyptus obliqua with peppermint trees. It might have brooker gum, and often bracken, austral bracken, the fern, is quite a prominent component of that. And can be quite herb-rich once you get down on your hands and knees, and there'll be lots of little kind of herbs or forbs, little grasses, small orchids. It can be quite patchy though, and because of the history, a lot of this country has been, unfortunately, had severe harvesting. There has been a lot of influence on these kind of messmate forests. So it's harder to find really old growth stands of the shrubby foothills or the herb-rich foothill forest. Dam forest, one of my favourites. This is, we tend to only get this on the more wetter and kind of sheltered gullies, and is more restricted. I'd say that if you go in the mountains east of Melbourne, you tend to get, it's more widespread. In Western Victoria, it's kind of on the edge of its climatic range, and I'd say with a changing climate, it's one of our most vulnerable kind of vegetation communities. It's got a really high component of ferns, as well as the amazing diversity of fungi and lichen and bryophytes, mosses and things you'll get in the damp forest. If you know musk daisy bush, that's a large kind of shrub or small tree, Illyria argophylla, that's often a prominent component in the wombat. So yeah, it's quite restricted to the gullies, and it can be very vulnerable to fire events. It will regenerate, but it can sometimes take hundreds of years to get back to a kind of more mature state. And I've got some photos coming up of different ferns from that community. Sedgy riparian woodlands are a really interesting one because it's once again on the kind of drainage lines. Tends to be more kind of flatter, broader valleys, often dominated by the tall sword sedge you can see in the photo there. Eucalypts, often brook gum and yarra gum, dominate the sedgy riparian woodland. And yeah, as I said, it's often in flatter valleys and often seems to have a bit of groundwater kind of influence. So you'll get areas where groundwater is cropping out, and you tend to get a lot of wetland plants growing in this community. And where you get lots of groundwater, you tend to even get these beautiful swamps. So the sedgy riparian woodland will grade into sometimes very extensive areas of swamp where this photo Jeremy's taken, you can see the beautiful sphagnum moss, which is more of a subalpine species. There's a lot of really rare plants we get in these kind of swamps, and my theory is actually that some of them are actually quite ancient systems, because some of these wetlands or swamps in the Wombat seem to have had groundwater influence, and they support sometimes populations of plants which are not known from anywhere else. And to me, if those had dried over the last few thousand years, they would have disappeared. So I think some of these have been stable enough and wet enough to kind of protect some really rare kind of wetland plants over thousands of years. And we've got the heathy and grassy dry forest. You might have seen, this is a kind of a good classic photo of Jeremy's on the right. You tend to get this more on the ridges and the more exposed kind of ridges and slopes. Often dominated by things like broadleaf peppermint, might have box species and stringy barks. You can see lots of what we call ericoid shrubs. This is more where you get really small-leafed kind of sclerophyllous species which have pretty much adapted to really dry conditions, and they often have very small leaves. So lots of heaths are very common. This is the common heath, our Victorian floral emblem in flower, the pink and white flowers. And yeah, you get a real diversity of, you might get orchids, lots of lilies and things in this on the heathy dry forest. It can be in high rainfall country. It doesn't need to be drier, but it's often, because it's often on quite steep ridges, it will be, I suppose, more exposed, and there's going to be drier soils because of the conditions, particularly if it's facing north or west. You're going to get some pretty exposed kind of ridges, which the plants need the right kind of adaptations to survive in that kind of environment. Now, I just wanted to, this is just a little tangent. I really want to talk about the disjunct species, because I find this really fascinating for the wombat. We have quite a lot of species which have this kind of distribution. So this is mountain beckia. You can see it's mostly a species of the subalps. It grows in kind of montane swamps in kind of eastern Victoria, and then we've got this little populations in the wombat as well as in the Grampians, one other site. And I've got a list of some of the plants we have seen this pattern for, but there's quite a lot of them. And to me, I find this fascinating because I always like to think of how plants get where they do and think about geological time. And to me, I'm pretty certain that, so pretty much we had an ice age around 20 to 10,000 million years, so 1,000 years ago. But then after the ice age finished around 10,000 years ago, which is when human civilizations really started to flourish, we actually had quite a wet period for the next 6,000 years. So it's actually much higher rainfall for a lot of Victoria between 10,000 and 4,000 years ago. And you can see right now that the forests of the wombat are quite a bit disconnected from the forests of eastern Victoria, but this is what we call the Kilmore Gap to the north of Melbourne. And I'm sure that when we had higher rainfall, there would have been a continuous, probably more of a continuous band of forest. And that kind of, to me, suggests that is why we get so many of these very isolated populations. And this goes for some of our fauna as well, things like the mountain skink, where it's only known from way on the other side of Melbourne to the east. And then you get these little kind of disjunct populations. Some things can get spread by birds, but or other means, but I think, to me, a lot of these plants, it looks like they're relic populations. They're pretty much remnants from, when these forests of eastern So now I'm going to go through some of the plants themselves. And we've got about 750 indigenous species recorded for the wombat, which is pretty amazing. That's about 15% of the Victorian flora. There's about 5,000 or so species recorded in Victoria. So it's amazing diversity. I'm not going to go through all 750. I can if you want me to, maybe another time. We'll have an extended talk and we can go through all of them for the plant nerds. So starting with the peas, we've got, this is the beautiful Warri bush pea. This one you tend to get on the edges of some of those sedgy riparian woodlands I talked about. So it tends to, as the name suggests, it's quite a worry little thing. It's only, if you don't see it in flower, it's quite easy to miss. Not particularly common because it's only around these very specialised kind of wetland habitats. So yeah, that's Almelia subumbellata, which is in the Fabaceae family. Another pea, this is the gorse bitter pea. You might have seen this around. Those beautiful egg and bacon flowers are really good at attracting native bees. So they're really good if you see some of the Poltoneas as well, and the Dilwinias and the gorses, so the bitter peas. Those egg and bacon flowers often attract a lot of native bees. And this one's pretty common in some of the more heathy or grassy dry forests I talked about, so more in the kind of drier kind of vegetation communities. Now we'll go through some ferns. So this one's the beautiful mother spleenwort, this kind of frond you can see down here. And that's growing at the base of a really large musk daisy bush. Another photo of Jeremy's. You can see the musk daisy bush just coated in beautiful mosses. But that mother spleenwort, quite rare in the wombat. If you go eastern Melbourne, rainforest gullies all the way into East Gippsland, you get quite a lot of this species, but in the wombat, quite restricted to those damp forest gullies that I was talking about. This is there's a few ferns on this one. The one in the foreground, the kind of lighter coloured one, is the hard water fern, Blechnum wattsii, which once again, very common eastern Melbourne, not as common in the wombat, more in some of the better, more kind of wetter kind of gullies. Behind that, you've got another fern species, the beautiful smooth tree fern, Dicksonia antarctica. So yeah, some nice ferns in that photo. This is a rough tree fern, and it's actually quite rare to see in the wombat plants of this height. This one could be well over 100 years old. Pretty slow growing. I mean, they grow a bit faster than Dicksonia, but this one looks quite ancient to me. And they can be very susceptible to things like harvesting. So one thing they do when they do the kind of logging, where for years there was this story that was told that when they did the harvesting that they would regenerate the forest. But what they do is they'd have bulldozers going through the coops and you'd actually lose your tree ferns. The tree ferns play a major role in kind of protecting and cooling the soil layer. There's major differences between a forest that's got a healthy cover of tree ferns compared to where they've been taken out. And then you're going to get an increase in fire regimes when you start getting this drying of the forest. So we do have a bit of rough tree fern around, but it's more in the gullies. It's less common to see these really big ones. And I'd say probably one that's more vulnerable to a changing climate. It's a beautiful austral king fern. I just took this one with Jeremy the other day. This is on the headwaters of the Lerdyderg River. It's actually this one here. And you can't see, but it's actually got a trunk that can be well up to 1 metre in diameter, so really, really chunky looking trunk. And they've been recorded living over 200 years. So that's pretty restricted in the wombat. This is, like I said, along the upper reaches of the Lerdyderg, and you can see a really beautiful bit of the stream there. So that's the austral king fern. And just next to that, there was some silky fan fern. So this is Stichus urcellatus, once again, not particularly common. And it'll form like little kind of small thickets, only grows to about waist height, and will form little thickets, particularly along streams where there's lots of moisture. This one, the scrambling coral fern, is a bit more sporadic in its occurrence. You can get it along gullies, but sometimes even up on ridges and slopes. I think what you sometimes get on those ridges is these kind of perch water tables, and it can be almost a bit, because there's a clay layer, you might actually have a lot of moisture sitting there, and you can get patches of coral fern even on the dry ridges. It's a really great habitat for things like antechinus and bushrat, because it forms these really dense, almost impenetrable kind of thickets. It's quite rambling. If you see, don't see as much in the wombat, but some places east of Melbourne, you see it covering hectares, like really large patches of it. This is the bushy club moss, and one of my favourites because I love to compare it with. So this is a photo, not a photo. It's a drawing from the Carboniferous period, which was, I don't know, about 300 million years ago. So at that time, that was before pines and flowering plants had even evolved. And before that, we had these club mosses. Actually, had this period of thriving around the world in parts of the world. But this one where we've got the bushy club moss only grows to about 0.5 metre. Back in the day, they used to grow to about 10 metres tall, and we had these huge forests of club moss. And eventually, so much of that died. There was so much growth of these club mosses that they died down and formed huge kind of areas of peat. And a lot of the coal that's mined around the world comes from pretty much these ancient club moss forests, which is pretty cool. But well, not the burning of the coal, but the kind of story. So but the bushy club moss we get in the Wombat, it's quite sporadic. It's not very common. You tend to get it maybe on like kind of wet cuttings and things. Not very common species. I'm not too sure about its tolerance to fire. I think it might be quite sensitive, but yeah, we were talking about that. We're not too sure if it might regenerate or not. This is the mountain correa. So yeah, Correa lawrenceana. I'm sure many of you are aware of the different correa species you might have seen in gardens. There's many birds. I think spinebills love to feed on them. So yeah, this one is, once again, we places east of Melbourne where there's hectares of this species, but we only get it in kind of around the edges of a few gullies and things in the Wombat. And it's got a very beautiful flower like all the correas. The silver banksia. So this one, this is quite interesting because we get a kind of a tree form of this species growing on the plains, like where you get more volcanics or sometimes alluvial soil. I saw a tree in Tasmania that was over 1 metre in girth, the trunk of this thing. Whereas the plants we get in the Wombat, usually more the scrubby form. It grows to maybe 2 metres high, 1 or 2 metres high. It's more of a shrub that grows and covers the kind of heathy forest we talked about. Pretty common, and yeah, obviously great food. I imagine there's things like pygmy possums that would really feed on the banksias. So yeah, one of my favourites for sure. Prickly currant bush, pretty widespread. This one in probably the herb-rich and shrubby foothill forests. Very edible berries, and also this bird spread that. It's got quite prickly, as the name suggests. Walking through this, you really notice the prickles on it. But yeah, it's a really widespread but quite beautiful little shrub we get. The mountain beckia. So this one is, have we got one of these here today?
Yeah,
I think we do. Where is it?
It might be a struggle to find it without flowers.
Okay, well, yeah, let's skip that. I can't. Oh, is it this one here? No? Don't know, might be at the back. Anyway, so, no, it's not there. So yeah, this one is really interesting because I talked about these swamps we get which have really some really rare wetland plants. And I had the map of this species before where I was showing the disjunct records. So this is the mountain beckia, and it's only, was it Barkstead, this photo? Yeah, Barkstead on the edge of a swamp. I think it's been recorded one other place in the Wombat. Then there's one place in the Grampians, and then you've got to drive probably an hour and a half east of Melbourne to find the next population. So yeah, it's really stunning little species, and usually likes to see these kind of montane bog conditions. So that's the mountain beckia. This is another one that's quite disjunct again. I had that up on that list before because I think we only know this from Blue Hills. There's another site I know on Mount Macedon, but it's another one that is pretty much an Eastern Victorian species. So this photo, yeah, we took up at, Jeremy took when we were up at Blue Hills, which is a trachyte lava dome not far from here. Quite high elevation with very kind of montane conditions. Quite a cute little thing. It's only, a couple of centimetres high, but obviously very pretty. Growing amongst the polytrichum moss there. Turquoise berry, this one's got the, beautiful turquoise kind of berries, which I think the birds would be spreading around. You tend to get this it's kind of sporadic. You get on the edges of gullies around the place, but it's kind of only a small, when it's not got the berries on it, can be easy to overlook. It's only kind of growing, 20, 30 centimetres high. So the turquoise berry, which isn't very common. This one is more common. We see pretty widespread. It's Yagania siberiana, the red fruit sausage, which I think a really great habitat plant. When you get big tussocks of this, it's providing a lot of cover for for a lot of animals, particularly some of our smaller mammals and things. So you get that pretty widespread through some of the kind of shrubby foothill and herb-rich foothill forests. The creeping raspwort, this is another kind of species we get in the swamps. So it's kind of a ground cover, only grows to a few centimetres high. Quite inconspicuous unless you kind of get down close and see some of these things down at ground level. The satin everlasting is not very common in the wombat. There's a few scattered populations heading north up to around Fryestown as well. But yeah, one of our Asteraceae, one of our little daisies we get in the wombat. The snowy daisy bush, this one, not too uncommon, and beautiful garden plant if you live in the right, particularly if you're somewhere like Trentham. This is a great one to grow in your garden. It's got beautiful white flowers. This one, the mountain cotula, is pretty widespread in the wombat, but it's funny, if you head further north, it drops out very quickly. It seems to like the more rainfall. I think this is it here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
We got one here we prepared earlier. So it's only a small little ground cover, and you often get on the edges of tracks and things in kind of high rainfall country. But yeah, it's a daisy, another Asteraceae species. Bundle giddy flower. This one, you're more likely to see in the kind of drier forests once again. We've got a few different species of Herbertia in the forest, but yeah, this one's the bundled giddy flower. Bootlace bush, with a name because the stems are actually very tough, and I'm sure Jara will probably use some of that stem for twine, but I've heard stories that settlers used to use it for bootlaces apparently. I've never tried it myself, but beautiful kind of shrub growing to about metre and a half, more in kind of wetter gullies.
Trentham Falls even.
Trentham Falls. Dwarf G-bung. This is a Petunia, which once again pretty sporadic. We get on kind of cuttings and things around the place, but not very common. Clustered Pomaderus, that's one of our Pomaderus species we get. We also get the small leaf Pomaderus throughout the forest. And now onto some threatened species. So wombat's got a really incredible range of threatened species, which is, it's good, but it's also not great that so many species are so rare. Like some of these are naturally restricted in their distribution. They're like local endemics, things like the wombat bush pea I'll talk about. Before we started messing with the landscape so much, they would have been quite rare, whereas others have probably had been very impacted by land management in recent times and have declined. But there are many more that are regionally significant. So when I say 39 listed species, these are listed under the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act or the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. But then we've got lots of species which, like our little Lagonifera from the swamps that I mentioned before. This is only known from one or two places in the wombat, but is not listed as under legislation because it's common in eastern Victoria. But I'd say these are just as important in our region because we've only got a couple of populations. There's close to 20,000 of those listed threatened species records, which is kind of, I'll show you the map. They're all records of threatened species. There was a lot of survey done after the storms associated with some of the argy-bargy going on. So but there's just incredible. You can see some areas of the wombat just have such a widespread distribution of threatened plants. So we'll just go through a few. So this is the beautiful wombat leafless bossia. Definitely probably amongst the rarest. There's only 5 discrete patches. Gail sent me a great article that's in the newsletter if you want to read more about this. But there's only 5 discrete plants. It grows pretty much from rhizomes. So the plants I've seen, they cover a few metres, but they're one plant. And then my understanding, those 5 plants are only spread across about 2 square kilometres of forest. So it's very localised. There's a subspecies that's all the way over in East Gippsland, which is, looks very similar to this. And they used to think it was the same species, but now they consider the other one a subspecies. But your mind wonders how it could be that far apart. There's obviously been an interesting story over time. Sometimes these rhizomatous plants have a way of persisting because there's a Lomatia species in Tasmania that's, I think it's 11,000 years old, the one individual, because it keeps suckering. So some of these, I know that one of the plants they found in the 90s is still alive because it just keeps suckering, which is great, but still trying to figure out how to grow this is my understanding. Hasn't had a lot of success. I think there's problems with, there might be like we need the right fungi or something in the soil. So yeah, we really need to have a bit more work on this one. I'm hoping we can get it listed under the federal legislation because it definitely qualifies, only knowing from only a small number of plants. So it's probably one of the most rarest plants in our region. The hairy beard heath, this is just a small kind of shrub we get in the kind of, I suppose, some of the ridges and drier forests of the Wombat. The dwarf silver wattle. This one, I'm sure many of you have seen the normal silver wattle, Acacia dilbata. This is very similar in some ways, but it's got smaller leaves, which if you see in this photo, they're quite close together. So on the normal dilbata, the silver wattle that's more widespread, those leaves are quite spread apart, whereas in this dwarf silver wattle, they're really close together. And there's quite a few populations in the Wombat. There's only a few places in Victoria we get this species, usually in kind of higher rainfall areas. But it's quite sporadic in its occurrence, but there's some really good populations in the Wombat. This is a large leaf cinnamon wattle, another one of our wattles. So this one, I know it's very common, well not common, but there's more of it around, say, Kinglake, Talangi area. In the Wombat, we just have a small number of populations of the Acacia leprosa. So that's another of our rare wattles. The Warri bossia. It's one that Jeremy prepared earlier. So this one, I'd say probably the Wombat would be one of the hotspots for this species anywhere in the world or in Victoria. It's found in other places, but there's really high concentration in the Wombat. So Wombat's really important for the Warri bossia. In the right kind of gullies, you can find quite a lot of this in the Wombat Forest. So that's the Warri bossia. Creeping grevillea. What's that? Oh, that's a protector. Did you get Reapers? There's Reapers there as well. Oh, here in front of me. So yeah, this is a beautiful one. It's got an interesting distribution. There's some of it around kind of King Lake, and then a bit of a gap once again, and then you get it in the Wombat around Dalesford, Sailors Creek Gorge, that kind of area. Yeah, beautiful flowers it's got. Not in flower on this one. But yeah, you get quite a lot. You've probably seen, this is another, these are what we call the holly leaf grevilleas. We get a whole range of these that are quite a bit similar in their appearance in Victoria, but they have very close, small geographic ranges. So that one, Obtecta, is from the Friars Range kind of area, closer towards Castlemaine. You get a whole range of these very small distribution, these different holly leaf grevilleas that all have their own different patch around different areas of central Victoria. The Wombat bush pea, probably the most widespread of our threatened plants, but it's really interesting because some places it's just everywhere in the Wombat, but you go outside the Wombat and there's not many places you can find it. It's really quite endemic to our region. So I wouldn't say it's threatened at this point. It's very abundant, but it's very endemic to the Wombat area. Is there any of that here today?
Yeah.
Oh, this one, yeah. Yeah, you're welcome to come and have a look at some of these after the talk and ask the plants some questions if you want. Yarra gum, this is, quite a rare tree in the Wombat. You get more of it around, say, the Ballarat area. It extends across to places like Yarra Glen, east of Melbourne. That's where it got its name, the Yarra gum. Places like Spargo Creek, you can get some beautiful stands of this. Wheatsheath, it's quite localised and will be along creeks and drainage lines, the beautiful Yarra gum. Swamp bush pea. This is probably, once again, one of our more rarer species in the Wombat. So it's really cool to see that growing right here. That's it likes kind of swampy conditions, as the name suggests. So you need to go to that kind of sedgy riparian woodland I talked about to find it. But yeah, we don't know we've done quite a lot of survey in the Wombat and found very little of this. I think there used to be more of it around. I'm not sure if it's declined. I think Jeremy said he knows 1 or 2 sites. So it's and once again, this is another one. There's populations around here, and then the next I know around kind of King Lake area. It's a netted daisy bush, quite localised. Another one of our beautiful Illyria species. Lacy River buttercup, I love this one. It's a, if you know your buttercup species, it's a great reference there, seeing, I think it's Jeremy's hand, someone's hand. It's the size of that leaf is quite massive, and it's I think it's the only site we know on the Wombat is pretty much around Spargo Creek. And even elsewhere in Victoria, I've seen this in places like near Wombat Forest in the southwest. It's always quite rare. It goes a bit further east of Melbourne. So yeah, incredibly rare, some of these wetland plants, because a lot of our wetlands have been drained and modified and had the hydrology changed. So yeah, a lot of these plants have become very uncommon. So which fauna rely on plants? Well, all of them. Essentially, all of our fauna have some reliance on the plants, not only just the structure of obviously the forests that the plants make up. So many of our fauna are dependent on the hollows of the trees for nesting and breeding and sheltering. We get countless of insects that feed on not only the leaves, but have specific relationships with different plants, like with going for different flowers that they feed upon. Obviously, all the kangaroos, wallabies, wombats feeding on grasses, wombats feeding on the roots. So yeah, the fauna, obviously really important that we have the diversity of plant species to support the diversity of fauna, because the fauna all have very specific relationships with different plant species. It's not just we can have a small number of plants supporting a wide diversity of fauna. We need the diversity in our forests to be able to support the amazing diversity of the fauna species. So I'm just going to go through some of the threats to the forest that we're facing. So the big one here is, Gazette the National Park. It's been proposed since 2021, and it seems to just keep stalling. There's people here who know more about the background of this than I do, but there's been numerous deadlines ignored. We really need the park to go ahead to protect the forest from kind of logging activities that continue under different kind of guises, different names. There's also lots of mining proposals that have been happening in the last few years, and lots of other damaging activities as well. So that's really important to see that go ahead. So industrial forestry, community campaigning was so important to stop this. I remember my first experience as a kid when I was wandering the Wombat was my first time I'd ever come across logging, and I remember just being shocked, like I just didn't understand it as a kid, like why, what are you doing? And campaigning led to cessation, well, kind of slowing of logging for quite a period, particularly between 2010 and 17 is my understanding. Then we had the storm damage in 21, and that's been used as a bit of excuse, totally used as excuse to go and extract timber, often trying to say the forest was a ticking fire bomb, even though the shrubs are what cause the fuel loads, not the logs. When you have a big bushfire going through, it's not the logs that burn. DECA actually admit that in their kind of own fuel hazard assessments. So yeah, there's been a lot of kind of this industrial forestry continuing, and we needed to stop in the Wombat because I think there was a report I heard that even from around 1900, there was a quote from someone saying that the Wombat had already been completely logged over by then, within 50, 60 years of settlement. So it's time for it to get out of the forest. Hazard reduction burning, this is something I've been talking a bit about lately because we all want to reduce the risk around our houses, but there's a lot of burning. I won't go on too much of a tangent, but planned burning from the kind of mapping I've been doing has been showing to increase fuel loads because it actually it often stimulates the recruitment of shrubs. So you actually get a reduction in fuels for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then it increases to beyond the pre-fire level for many years afterwards. It also really drives the forest out and has major impacts on, we lose a lot of our hollow-bearing trees this way because there's often, they'll do a burn and then a lot of the trees look unsafe and they go through and cut a lot of them down, you can see on that photo. So the planned burning, I think it needs to be much more nuanced in its approach to around assets and not this kind of remote burning, which is having a huge impact on biodiversity. And there's a lot of evidence, not only myself, but people like David Lindemeyer now saying that planned burning can actually increase the fuel risk. So mining and fossicking, like fossicking is, there's room for it in places, but it can really cause damage to, sensitive streams if it's in the wrong place, even small scale kind of fossicking. And then we're having like more major mining kind of operations are proposed in certain places, including the headwaters of the Lodyerg River. I'm not exactly sure what the current status of those proposals are, but there's, definitely we need that kind of national park status to stop the mining going ahead in the forest. And then, of course, there's, I haven't talked about the introduced plants today as much. Well, we've got plants like gorse and introduced pea, blackberry is another common one, English broom and other broom species, Montpellier broom. Lots of these in particularly areas that might have had a lot of disturbance. You can get more of these weed infestations, and in some places they've just responded to major disturbance, but there's times now where we can get in there and remove the weeds and hopefully revegetate these areas. We've also got feral species like deer and rabbits. Particularly fallow deer are becoming pretty common in this part of Victoria and can have a major impact on a lot of our plants. So what can we do to help? Well, I'm sure probably everyone in the room knows this. I think I saw a comment online saying, well, it's not the community who need to know what to do, it's usually the government, which is unfortunately true. But more and more, if you can kind of, joining Wombat Forest Care is a huge step to getting involved in citizen science projects and the advocacy work they do, or whatever your kind of local group is. There's so much happening these days with different programs and working bees you might be able to join, different friends groups. Advocate for forest protection. It's never very inspiring work having to write submissions all the time to government and try and do the long slog of trying to protect the forest, but it's just so essential we keep speaking up. The more people speak up and the more activity on social media talking about how much we care about the forest, the better. And obviously we've all got a kind of responsibility for our own property to manage for conservation if that works. So if you live around the Wombat, there's things you can do like controlling weeds or revegetation and planting and monitoring your local flora and fauna as well. I think that is the talk, but I'm happy to take complaints or questions or